It was their first night together, and when she whispered, "Be gentle," everything changed forever. No one imagined that those words would reveal a side of him that few knew. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to see how that night unfolded. The white cotton sheets contrasted with Emma's trembling hands, and when the words "be gentle" escaped from those rose-colored lips, something inside Michael's chest broke in a way that no million-dollar negotiation had ever managed to achieve. He, with his 40 years of experience commanding boardrooms in Manhattan with just an icy glance, who had the American business world at his feet, felt completely disarmed before that youthful fragility. The soft scent of jasmine emanating from her hair mixed with the lavender drifting through the open window, and in that moment, under the golden light of the Tiffany lamps, the most feared businessman in the city made the most important decision of his life. He would be everything this 23-year-old woman needed, no matter the cost. Emma Carter had arrived in his life like summer storms in the South, without warning, transforming everything in their path. Her brown eyes, large as almonds, looked at him now with a mixture of fear and trust that completely disarmed him. There was something in the way she touched his face, as if afraid he might disappear, that revealed a vulnerability he didn't know he could feel protective of. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his hoarse voice breaking on the final syllables. "I would never hurt you." It was a promise he knew he had to keep, though he wasn't sure how to maintain it. For 17 years, since taking control of the family company at 23, exactly the age Emma was now, Michael had built an empire erected on foundations of calculated coldness and ruthless decisions. His three most distinctive characteristics were known in all business circles across the country: the ability to read people like open books, an iron discipline that bordered on obsessive, and a heart that seemed to have been forged in steel. But Emma, with her innocence that wasn't naivete, but rather a conscious choice to see beauty where others saw only grey, had found the only crack in his armor, the absolute terror of allowing someone to see the frightened boy still living inside him. The night progressed with a slowness that seemed suspended in time. Each caress was a silent question, each sigh a tacit answer. Michael discovered that being gentle didn't mean just controlling physical force, but opening emotional floodgates he had locked away for decades. When the first rays of the New York dawn began filtering through the linen curtains, painting the room in pearlescent and pink tones, Emma slept curled against his chest, and he remained awake, watching her breathe with a peace he had never experienced. 3 weeks after that transformative night, Michael's closets, previously organized with military precision, containing only Italian suits and custom-made shirts, began housing simple cotton dresses and floral skirts. The penthouse in Tribeca, which had previously echoed only with the sound of his solitary footsteps and phone conversations about business, now resonated with crystalline laughter and folk songs she hummed while watering the herbs and geraniums she insisted on cultivating on every available terrace. "Why do you plant flowers everywhere?" Michael asked one morning, observing her from the doorway as she placed terracotta pots on the terrace overlooking the Hudson River. Emma turned, dirt under her nails and a radiant smile on her face. "Because flowers remind us that beauty can grow even in the coldest spaces. They just need a little care and attention." It wasn't a simple answer. It was a declaration of intent, and Michael knew it. She wasn't just planting flowers. She was cultivating life in a space that had been sterile for too long. The days acquired a new routine. Michael woke at 5:30 in the morning, as he always had, but now found Emma awake, brewing coffee in the marble and stainless steel kitchen, bare feet on the cold tiles and hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't know how to cook elaborate dishes, but her scrambled eggs were perfect, with that exact point where they remained creamy and tender. "In Charleston, my grandmother taught me that the best food isn't the most expensive, but the food made with love," she'd say while serving him breakfast. And Michael, who had dined at the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in New York and beyond, discovered she was right. But the changes weren't without resistance. The first major test came when Michael cancelled a crucial trip to Boston, a negotiation with investors that had been prepared for months, to accompany her to a routine medical appointment. "Michael, it's just an annual checkup," Emma protested while getting dressed that morning. "You don't need to come with me. I want to be there," he responded, with a firmness that admitted no discussion. The sound of heated discussions on the phone echoed through the office all afternoon. His partners nearly had nervous breakdowns. Robert Chen, his oldest partner, a man who had been with him from the beginning, was particularly direct. "Have you lost your mind, Michael? $50 million are at stake. There are things more important than money, Robert." "Since when?" The incredulity in his partner's voice was palpable. Michael hung up without responding. For the first time in his 40 years of life, something was more important than closing a deal. That night, when Emma discovered what he had sacrificed, she cried in his arms. "I can't ask you to give up your life for me." "I'm not giving up my life," he whispered, wiping her tears with his thumb. "I'm finding it." Michael's library was a sanctuary of walnut wood and leather-bound books, a space where he rarely allowed anyone to enter. Emma discovered it one rainy April afternoon when drops pattered against the windows and New York was covered in a grey and melancholic blanket. She was looking for a book of frost poetry that Michael had mentioned, when her hand brushed against something hard under a white cloth in the farthest corner of the room. When she removed the fabric, she found an artisan acoustic guitar with mother-of-pearl inlays and precious woods, so beautiful it seemed like a museum piece. "What are you doing in here?" Michael's voice sounded from the door, and Emma startled. When she turned to look at him, she saw something she had never seen before in his eyes, pure, naked shame. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" she began apologizing, but he raised a hand to stop her. For a long moment, Michael remained in the doorway, jaw tense and fists clenched at his sides. Finally, he entered the library and closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch was like a declaration of intimacy. "I've played since I was a kid," he confessed, his voice barely a hoarse whisper. "Or I used to. I haven't played in almost 30 years. Emma sat on the worn leather sofa, holding the guitar with reverence. "Why did you stop playing?" Michael poured himself a scotch from the antique bar, though it was barely mid-afternoon. He drank slowly, letting the amber liquid burn his throat before responding. "My father considered music a distraction for dreamers. He said serious businessmen didn't waste time with artistic nonsense. When I was 12 and coming back from a guitar lesson, he paused, the memory still painful after so many years, smashed my first guitar against the living room wall, told me if I played again he'd throw me out of the house." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with all the pain of a boy forced to bury his soul to survive. "And this guitar?" Emma asked softly. "I bought it 15 years ago on a trip to Nashville. Thought maybe, but I never could. The scars are too deep." Emma stood, holding the guitar carefully, and walked toward him. Without saying a word, she placed it in his hands. Michael took it instinctively, and his fingers found the strings with a familiarity that time hadn't erased. "Wounds only heal when we expose them to light," she said. "You don't have to play now, but someday when you're ready, I want to hear you." That night, Michael dreamed of his mother, a woman with sad eyes who looked away every time his father punished him. He woke with his heart racing and Emma holding him in the darkness. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're not alone." 4 months slipped by like leaves carried by the wind, and Emma began to feel the suffocating weight of living in a gilded cage. At 23, she was in a phase of life where she needed to prove her worth, not just to the world but mainly to herself. The morning everything changed began like any other. Michael was in his office reviewing contracts for a merger with a West Coast company, while Emma had breakfast alone on the terrace, watching the herbs she'd planted bloom in shades of green and purple. Her phone buzzed with a message from her best friend from Charleston, Sophie, attaching photos of her new apartment in Brooklyn and her job at an art gallery. "I'm living my dream," the message said. "When are you going to live yours?" The words drove into her chest like thorns. What was her dream? Living comfortably in a penthouse without financial worries, but without purpose of her own? The question haunted her all morning. When Michael emerged from his office for lunch, he found Emma unusually silent, moving the caprese salad around on her plate without really eating. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emma took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to work." Michael set down his fork and looked at her attentively. "You don't need to work. I can—" "It's not about financial need," she interrupted, with a firmness in her voice that surprised them both. "It's about existential need. I need to do something that's mine, Michael. Something I build with my own hands." The conversation that followed was tense. Michael argued from logic and protection. Emma from the heart and autonomy. Neither gave ground. "You're 23 years old," Michael said finally. "You're still discovering who you are. Wouldn't it be more sensible to wait, finish your degree at NYU and then decide?" "Precisely because I'm 23, I need to explore," Emma responded, her eyes shining with contained tears. "I don't want to wake up at 40, wondering what would have happened if I'd had the courage to try." The reference to his age was unconscious, but it hit like a punch. Michael stood from the table and walked to the window overlooking the river. The age difference between them, which had never been a real problem, suddenly felt like an abyss. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked without turning. "That I'm someone who lived without courage?" Emma stood and walked to him, placing her hand on his back. "No, but I think you lived according to others' expectations for so long that you forgot you had a choice. I don't want to make the same mistake." A week later, Michael came home with an envelope. Inside was a job contract for a junior position at a small publishing house in Greenwich Village, owned by an acquaintance of his. The salary was modest, but the job was real. Emma looked at the contract and then at him. "I don't want favors." "It's not a favor," Michael responded. "I made a call to get you an interview. The rest depended on you. And they hired you because they read your writing samples and liked them." She wanted to be annoyed by his intervention, but the excitement of having a real opportunity was stronger. She hugged Michael so tightly, she almost knocked him over. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "But next time let me find my own opportunities." Deal. The charity gala at the Plaza was one of those annual events where New York's elite gathered to write generous checks while drinking French champagne and pretending to care about social causes. Michael detested these events, but his presence was expected, practically mandatory for someone of his position. Emma prepared for hours for the evening, conscious that it would be her first official public appearance as Michael's partner in this type of social circle. The dress she chose was simple but elegant, midnight blue that made her eyes shine. She avoided ostentatious jewelry, preferring only the small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. "You look beautiful," Michael said when she descended the stairs, and the sincerity in his voice made her smile. The Plaza's ballroom was exactly what Emma expected. Crystal chandeliers projecting light like diamonds, impeccable white linen tablecloths, and conversations in various languages floating like expensive perfume in the air. She clung to Michael's arm, feeling all eyes fixed on her, evaluating her, judging her, wondering who this young woman was on the arm of New York's most coveted bachelor. Everything was going well until she appeared. Victoria Ashford entered the ballroom like someone entering their own home, in a designer gown that probably cost more than Emma had earned in an entire year at her old job, her raven hair perfectly styled in a French chignon, her lips painted dark red, and that confidence that only comes from belonging to this world since birth. Emma felt Michael tense beside her. "Who is she?" she asked quietly. "Victoria, my ex-fiancée." Emma's heart sank. Michael had briefly mentioned he'd been engaged years ago, but had never given details. Now she understood why. Victoria headed directly toward them, her Chanel perfume leaving a trail in the air. "Michael, darling." Her voice was smooth as velvet and sharp as a knife. "What a surprise to see you here. I thought you decided to retire from social life." "Victoria," Michael responded with icy courtesy. "This is Emma." Victoria's eyes slid over Emma with an assessment that lasted barely 2 seconds but felt like an eternity. "Charming," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "How refreshing. Michael has always had a taste for the different." The poison in the compliment was evident. Emma shook her hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine." The evening turned into subtle torture. Victoria circulated through the ballroom, conversing fluently in French with ambassadors, debating European politics with senators, laughing familiarly with people who had known Michael for decades. Each interaction was a silent demonstration. "I belong to this world. You don't." During dinner, when the conversation at their table turned to investments in Asian markets, Emma felt completely lost. Financial terms flew over her head like birds she couldn't catch. Victoria, strategically seated nearby, participated with intelligent comments that made everyone nod with approval. "Emma, what do you do?" Victoria asked with false sweetness. "I work at a publishing house," Emma responded, raising her chin. "How lovely." "As a secretary." as a copy editor and manuscript reader. Ah, how wonderful to have hobbies, Victoria smiled, before turning to continue a conversation about corporate bonds. Michael took Emma's hand under the table and squeezed. She forced herself to smile, but inside, something was breaking. The final straw came when Victoria approached Michael directly while Emma was in the restroom. "Seriously, Michael?" Emma heard as she returned, stopping behind a column. "She's a child, half your age." "She's 23, Victoria. She's an adult woman. She's a girl with stars in her eyes who has no idea who you really are or the world you live in. How long do you think it'll last when she gets bored of playing house?" "This conversation is over. I'm just trying to save you from a mistake. Remember why we ended, Michael? Because you couldn't open up, couldn't love. What makes you think it'll be different with her?" Emma didn't wait to hear more. She walked directly to them, positioning herself beside Michael. "It'll be different because he chose to make it different," she said with a clear voice. "And so did I." Victoria raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "She has guts, I'll give you that." "She has much more than that," Michael responded, placing his arm around Emma's waist. "She has everything you never had, Victoria. She has heart." On the drive home, Emma remained silent, looking out the car window as Manhattan's lights passed like shooting stars. Michael drove, casting worried glances at her every few minutes. "What are you thinking?" he finally asked. Emma took her time responding. "I'm thinking that maybe Victoria is right. Maybe I'm too young, too inexperienced, too ordinary for your world." Michael pulled the car over to the side of the West Side Highway, not caring about the other vehicles speeding past. He turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "Listen to me carefully, Emma Carter. You are not too anything. You are exactly everything I need. Your youth? It's a gift, not a defect. It reminds me there's still time to change, to be better. Your inexperience in business? I don't care. You have experience in things that truly matter. Kindness, authenticity, courage. Your supposed ordinariness? You're the most extraordinary person I've met. But I don't belong to your world. Then we'll build a new one where we both belong." Emma cried in his arms, and Michael held her until the tears ran dry. But they both knew Victoria's words had planted seeds of doubt that would be hard to eradicate. The following months were a period of intense growth and simultaneous pain for Emma. The work at the publishing house, though humble, provided something she had desperately craved: purpose. Each manuscript she read, each correction she made, each editorial meeting where her opinion was heard, made her feel more real, more complete. But the balance between her life with Michael and her professional life was precarious. She left home at 7 in the morning to take the subway and didn't return until 8 at night, with tired eyes and an aching body from sitting all day in a small, poorly ventilated office in Greenwich Village. Michael, accustomed to having her available, struggled with the adjustment. "Have dinner with me tonight," he'd ask over the phone. "There's a new restaurant in Soho I want to try." "I can't, honey. We have an editorial meeting until 9. They're considering one of the manuscripts I recommended." The silence on the other end of the line was eloquent. Michael wasn't used to hearing "I can't." The tension exploded one night when Emma arrived home past 11, exhausted after a particularly intense session at the publishing house where they'd been debating the commercial viability of an experimental novel she loved, but others considered too risky. "Where have you been?" Michael asked from the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. It wasn't accusatory, but there was a note of concern that bordered on control. "Working," Emma responded, dropping her bag and kicking off her shoes with a sigh of relief. "I already told you we had a meeting." "Until 11 at night, Emma. That's not reasonable. It's what's required sometimes. Welcome to the real working world. I don't like you being alone in Greenwich Village at these hours. It's dangerous." Emma turned to look at him, and in her eyes was a flash of frustration. "Millions of people work late, Michael. You're not going to wrap me in cotton." "I'm not trying to wrap you in cotton. I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection. I need trust." The discussion escalated, words said in heat that both would regret later. Finally, Emma went upstairs to the bedroom and closed the door. Michael stayed downstairs, finishing his whiskey and wondering how something that had started so well was becoming so complicated. True love is not the absence of conflict, but the willingness to walk through fire together, knowing that the scars it leaves can strengthen rather than destroy. The reconciliation came in the early hours, when neither could sleep. Michael knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Can I come in?" Emma, who had been awake staring at the ceiling, responded with a soft voice. "Come in." He sat on the edge of the bed, and in the dim light, Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not being fair to you. I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At sharing, at letting go, at trusting that someone I love can take care of themselves." Emma sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. The soft light bathed Michael's face, revealing vulnerability in his eyes. "The age difference between us," Emma began. "It's not just about numbers. It's about life stages. You've already built your empire, already proved your worth. I'm barely starting. And I need you to let me make my own mistakes. But I can help you avoid those mistakes. I can use my experience to rob me of the opportunity to learn for myself," Emma interrupted gently. "I understand you want to protect me, but I also need you to respect me." Michael nodded slowly, letting the words penetrate. "You're right. It's just that when I love you this much, the idea that something could hurt you makes me irrational." Emma took his hand. "Then love me in a way that allows me to grow, not one that keeps me small." It was a crucial conversation, a turning point, but they both knew that understanding intellectually and applying emotionally were two very different things. Michael had been so immersed in his world of steel and glass in New York that he had forgotten places existed where time moved at a different pace. Charleston, Emma's small hometown in South Carolina, was one of those places. The drive from New York took 10 hours, and with each mile they advanced south, Emma transformed. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile grew wider, her voice acquired a southern accent she had been unconsciously suppressing in New York. Charleston appeared before them like a vision carved in history, with its famous antebellum mansions and oak trees draped in Spanish moss, painting the horizon with their drooping branches. The smell of magnolia and sweet tea floated in the warm May air. "Welcome to my world," Emma said as they entered the city through streets lined with historic homes where 2 cars could barely pass. Emma's grandmother, Rose, lived in a traditional house in the historic district with wraparound porches, rocking chairs, and a garden with a fountain where water dripped with a hypnotic rhythm. She was an 82-year-old woman with lively eyes and gnarled hands that still made the best pecan pie in Charleston. "So you're the one who has my girl living in that enormous city," Rose said, evaluating Michael from head to toe without disguise. "Grandma," Emma protested, blushing. "Let me speak, child. At my age, I have the right to be direct." Michael, accustomed to intimidating in boardrooms, felt strangely nervous under the gaze of that elderly woman. "Yes, ma'am, that's me. And do you treat her well?" "I try to do that every day." Rose nodded slowly. "Try is all we can do, I suppose. Come, sit down. I'm going to make sweet tea and biscuits. In this house, nobody goes hungry." During the 3 days they spent in Charleston, Michael experienced a completely different world from his own. Here, people greeted each other on the street, even if they didn't know each other. The baker asked about your mother's health. Children played tag in cobblestone squares until dark. Conversations in cafes extended for hours, with no apparent purpose other than the simple pleasure of company. Emma took him to all her favorite places: the waterfront park where they could watch sailboats gliding across the harbor, Rainbow Row with its pastel-colored houses, the restaurants with low-country cuisine where shrimp and grits tasted like childhood and tradition. But it was at a church gathering where Michael truly understood who Emma was in essence. A dozen women of all ages met weekly to share food, stories, and support. Each brought something: pies, casseroles, sweet tea, homemade pickles. They sat in a circle in the community room and simply talked. Michael watched Emma completely transform. Here she wasn't the insecure young woman who doubted her place in New York's salons. She was the girl who had grown up on these streets, who knew every name and every story, who laughed easily and hugged without reserve. "Our Emma's going to publish a book," announced one of the older women, Mrs. Mercedes, proudly. "We always knew she'd do something special." "It's not confirmed yet, Mrs. Mercedes," Emma protested, but her eyes shone. "It will be," said another woman, Mrs. Rose Marie. "You have the gift of words just like your mama." It was the first time Michael heard anyone mention Emma's mother. That night, As they walked back to Grandma Rose's house under a star-filled sky that could never be seen in New York, he asked about her. "She died when I was 14, Emma said, her voice soft but without the sharp pain it would have had before. "Breast cancer. It was quick, only 6 months from diagnosis to—" She paused. She wrote too. Poetry, mainly. Nothing published, just notebooks full of verses she kept in a shoebox. Why didn't she ever publish them? Emma shrugged. Fear, I suppose. Fear of not being good enough, of being rejected, of her words not mattering. And do you have that fear? Every day. But I decided that the regret of not trying would be worse than the pain of rejection. Michael stopped in the middle of the empty street and turned her to face him. "Your mother would be proud of you." "I know," Emma smiled with tears in her eyes. "And you, Michael Walker, conqueror of New York, what makes you feel afraid?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in, how long? Decades. "Losing you," he admitted finally. "Not through death or circumstance, but because I become someone who makes you so small that you decide to leave, because I can't give you what you need." Emma stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. "Then don't be that person." It seemed simple. It wasn't. But in that moment, under the Carolina stars, with the echo of genuine laughter still ringing in his ears, Michael began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be different. On the last day in Charleston, Grandma Rose called Michael aside, while Emma was helping in the kitchen. "Do you love her?" she asked without preamble. "With all my being." "That's not what I asked. Love is a verb, not a feeling. Do you do the work that love requires?" Michael thought about the arguments, about his need to control, about how his love sometimes seemed to suffocate more than liberate. "I'm learning," Rose nodded. "Then there's hope. My Emma is special. Not because she's my granddaughter, but because she chose to be. She had the option to become bitter after losing her mother, to close herself off to the world, but she chose to open up more. Don't break her with your need to possess her." "I don't possess her. She's her own person. I know. The question is, do you know?" Grandma Rose's words haunted Michael during the entire drive back to New York. Emma slept in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, and he drove in silence, processing everything he had learned in those 3 days. He had seen a world where success wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in human connections. Where wealth was shared time, not accumulated money. Where important meant being present in moments that mattered, not closing the next big deal. And he realized something fundamental. Emma didn't need him to elevate her to his world. She needed him to descend to hers sometimes, for them to find a middle ground where they both could breathe. Sometimes the most important lessons don't come from teachers with university degrees, but from wise grandmothers who have lived long enough to understand that love without freedom is a prison, and freedom without love is a desert. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, when Michael was in a meeting with his legal team reviewing contracts for expansion into the Midwest. His assistant, Rose Martinez, a serious 50-year-old woman who had been with him from the beginning, interrupted the meeting with an expression Michael knew well. "Serious trouble. I need to speak with you. Now." In the privacy of his office, with panoramic views of Manhattan stretching behind him like a now-threatened promise, Rose handed him a financial report. Michael read it once, then again, and a third time, hoping the words would change. They didn't. James Morrison, his minority partner and supposed friend from business school, had been embezzling funds for at least 2 years. Fraudulent investments in non-existent projects, falsified invoices, a labyrinth of shell companies in tax havens. The amount was devastating, $53 million. How did we not detect this earlier? Michael's voice was dangerously calm. He was good, very good, and he had access to accounts that... Rose swallowed hard. "Michael, this is serious. If this goes public, the company could collapse, investors will flee. Banks might call in the loans, we could lose everything." Over the following weeks, Michael lived in a hell of meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and crisis management consultants. Days stretched until 2, 3 in the morning. The smell of cold coffee and papers became permanent in his office. The dark circles under his eyes deepened like canyons. Emma watched him deteriorate day by day. She tried to help by preparing food, offering to listen, simply being present. But Michael closed himself off more and more, returning to that steel armor he had worn for years before meeting her. "Talk to me," she begged. "Don't shut me out." "You can't help with this," he responded with a tired voice. "It's better if you stay away from the mess." "Your mess is my mess. We're together." "No, not in this." The distance between them grew like a crack in a glacier. Michael slept in the office, surrounded by legal documents. Emma woke alone in the bed they had shared, feeling the cold of his absence, both physical and emotional. The bomb finally exploded when the New York Times published an article on the front page. "Million-dollar fraud rocks Manhattan real estate empire." Though they didn't directly name Michael, the implications were clear. His phone exploded with calls from furious investors, journalists hungry for details, and partners demanding answers. The worst call was from his father. Richard Walker, now 78, but still with the temperament of a bull, called from his retirement in Florida with venom in every word. "I always knew you were weak," he spat into the phone. "You get distracted by a girl and look what happens. You let a thief destroy what I built." "You didn't build anything except resentment," Michael responded with a voice trembling with contained rage. "And I'm not weak. I'm human. Something you never understood. Human. That's just another word for loser. When you lose everything, don't come crying to me." The call ended with the sound of Richard hanging up violently. Michael stared at the phone, feeling the weight of decades of emotional abuse crushing him. That night, Emma found him on the floor of his office, surrounded by papers and with a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. He wasn't drunk, just exhausted to the bone. "You can't do this alone," she said, sitting beside him on the hardwood floor. "I should let you go," Michael murmured without looking at her. "You deserve someone without this kind of complications, someone who can give you security, stability." Emma took his face in her hands and forced him to look at her. "I chose to be here, in good times and bad, or do those words mean nothing to you? But we could lose everything, the penthouse, the money, everything. Then we'll lose it together. You think I care about this penthouse? The money? Michael, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my grandmother after my mother died. We shared a bathroom with the neighbors. And you know what? We were happy, because we had love. That's all we really need." Michael closed his eyes, finally letting the tears flow. He had been holding them back for weeks, being strong, maintaining composure. But now, on the floor of his office with the woman he loved holding him, he finally allowed himself to break. "I'm so afraid," he admitted, "of failing, of becoming what my father always said I was, of not being enough. You're already enough, and failure isn't falling. It's not getting back up." That night marked a shift. Michael stopped trying to manage the crisis alone. He let Emma be truly present, not just physically, but in the decision-making process. Together they reviewed options, talked with lawyers, explored paths forward. The solution that finally emerged was radical. Sell significant assets to compensate for the fraud and protect innocent investors. It would mean reducing the company to a fraction of its previous size. It would mean selling the Tribeca penthouse, the luxury cars, the investment properties. It would mean starting over, almost from scratch. "Are you sure you want to stay for this?" Michael asked when they signed the papers that initiated the process. "You're going to go from living in a penthouse to, I don't know where yet, a small apartment somewhere." Emma smiled, and there was a freedom in that smile that Michael hadn't seen before. "You know what's ironic? Since I came to New York, I always felt like an imposter in that huge place. Like I was playing a role that didn't belong to me. A small apartment sounds good, sounds real. You're extraordinary, you know that. I'm just practical, and I love you. The rest is detail. True riches aren't measured in what we accumulate, but in what we're willing to let go. And sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters." The move from the Tribeca penthouse to a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn was more than a change of address. It was an existential transformation. Michael, who for years had defined his worth by what he possessed, found himself literally stripped of all external symbols of success. The apartment was modest but bright, with a small balcony overlooking a quiet street where trees cast dancing shadows on the walls. There was no space for most of the furniture that had filled the penthouse. The entire library had to be reduced to 2 bookshelves. The walk-in closet became a simple shared closet. "Look on the bright side," Emma said as they unpacked boxes. "Now when I look for a shirt, I won't need a map." Michael tried to smile, but the humiliation was deep. At 41, he was starting over, as if he were 25. Everyone in New York knew. The articles in the business press had been merciless, some even gloating in his fall. From Olympus to the ground, the fall of the Walker Empire. How love blinded him to betrayal. Lessons in what not to do in business. Each headline was a stab. But the worst wasn't the press. It was running into acquaintances on the street. One afternoon, while buying bread at a local bakery near the new apartment, he ran into Anthony Reyes, a former business associate. The man literally crossed the street to avoid him. Another day, in a coffee shop where he tried to work on his laptop, he heard whispers from a nearby table. "Isn't that Michael Walker? The one who lost everything because he wasn't paying attention?" Michael came home that night, more defeated than Emma had ever seen him. "I can't do this," he said, dropping onto the second-hand couch they'd bought. "I can't go out and face the looks, the whispers." Emma sat beside him, taking his hand. "You know what I think every time I see those looks? That those people are so afraid of their own vulnerabilities, that they need to gloat over others to feel safe. They're cowards. Or they're realists. No, they're prisoners of their own egos. You're free now, Michael. Free from the weight of having to maintain an image. Free from pretending to be invincible. Don't you see this fall is the greatest gift life could give you? It doesn't feel like a gift, because you're still in the pain of loss. But eventually you'll see that you lost things but gained something more valuable: authenticity." The days turned into weeks, and Michael slowly began the process of rebuilding. But this time was different. He wasn't building an empire. He was building something sustainable. A small consultancy focused on helping family businesses avoid the type of fraud that had nearly destroyed him. The first clients came slowly, attracted not by his previous success, but by his experience with failure. They wanted to learn from his mistakes, and Michael, for the first time in his life, was completely honest about them. "I was arrogant," he told a Texas entrepreneur during a consultation. "I thought I was so smart that nobody could deceive me. I let ego blind me to warning signs that were there all along." His brutal honesty was refreshing in a business world full of ego and posturing. Slowly, his reputation began to change. He was no longer the fallen tycoon. He was the man who had the humility to learn from his mistakes. But growth wasn't linear. There were bad days, days where depression wrapped around him like thick fog. Emma learned to recognize the signs, the way he avoided eye contact with her, how he'd stare out the window for hours, the heavy silence that filled the apartment. On those days, she didn't try to cheer him with platitudes. She simply was present. She'd make tea, sit beside him, hold his hand. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just existed together in silence. "Why do you stay?" Michael asked on one of those dark days. "You could have an easier life with someone without so much baggage." "Because love isn't staying when it's easy," Emma responded. "It's staying when it's hard, when it gets ugly, when the person you love hates themselves, and your job is to remind them who they really are." "And who am I really?" Emma looked directly into his eyes. "You're a man who made mistakes but has the courage to correct them. A man who was hard as steel but learned to be soft. A man who lost an empire but is finding his soul. You're Michael. And that's more than enough." The turning point came one evening when, while cleaning the apartment, Emma found the guitar from Nashville wrapped in an old blanket in the closet. "You brought it?" Michael shrugged, almost embarrassed. "I couldn't leave it. It's silly, I know, I don't even play." "Play now." "Emma." "Play, please." With trembling hands, Michael took the guitar. He sat on the couch, positioning the instrument awkwardly at first, his fingers searching for the strings after so many years. The first sounds were discordant, clumsy, but then, slowly, muscle memory returned. His fingers found the chords of a folk song he'd learned when he was 12, before his father destroyed his first guitar. The music flowed, primitive and raw at first, then more fluid. He played for 10 minutes, eyes closed, completely lost in the sound. When he finally stopped, tears were running down his cheeks. "I forgot how much I loved this," he whispered. "You never forgot," Emma responded. "You just buried it. But things buried alive always find their way back to the surface." That night marked another shift. Michael began playing guitar regularly, first just at home, then signing up for classes to relearn forgotten techniques. Music became his therapy. a way to express emotions that words couldn't capture. One Sunday afternoon, he was playing on the balcony when an elderly neighbor looked out from her window. "That's beautiful," she called. "Can you play something by Bob Dylan?" Michael smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Emma had seen in weeks. "I'll try." The chords of Blowin' in the Wind filled the narrow street, imperfect but beautiful. Other windows began to open. People looked out, listening. Some applauded when he finished. "That," Emma said as they went back inside the apartment, "that's who you are. Not the businessman, not the tycoon. A man with music in his soul who's finally allowing it to flow." Michael hugged her tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I never will. But I need you not to give up on yourself either. True strength isn't never falling. It's getting up each time you fall, with a little more wisdom, a little more humility, and a little more grace." 6 months after the move, Emma faced her own crisis. Her first book, a collection of stories about love in difficult times that she'd been writing for 2 years, was finally published. But sales were disappointing, and the few reviews that appeared were mixed at best. "Promising but immature," wrote a critic in the Times. "Lacks emotional depth," declared another in the Post. Each word was a blow. Emma had poured her heart into those pages, stories inspired by her grandmother, by the women from the Charleston gatherings, by her own relationship with Michael. Seeing her work diminished hurt in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I'm not good enough," she told Michael one night, after reading another devastating review. "I should give up." Michael, who intimately understood the pain of public failure, sat across from her, taking her hands. "Remember what you told me when I wanted to give up? That failure isn't falling, it's not getting back up. Were your words just for me, or do you believe them too? It's different. You have experience, wisdom. I just have nothing. You're 24 years old. You have an entire lifetime to develop your voice. Do you know how many famous writers were rejected dozens of times before being recognized? Hemingway, Fitzgerald, all faced rejection. I'm not Hemingway. Not yet. But you could be if you don't give up now." Despite Michael's encouraging words, Emma fell into a dark period. She stopped writing. She'd come home from the publishing house and spend hours watching Netflix, avoiding her laptop, avoiding the blank page that felt like a silent accusation of her insufficiency. The work at the publishing house, which had once been exciting, became routine. She was stuck editing others' manuscripts, watching their words polished and published while hers languished in rejection. The tension in the apartment became palpable. 2 people in crisis at the same time in a small space was a recipe for conflict. Small irritations magnified, Michael leaving dirty dishes, Emma forgetting to buy milk, arguments about how to organize the shared closet. "I can't breathe here," Emma exploded one night after a particularly absurd argument about who had used the last roll of toilet paper without replacing it. "You think it's easy for me?" Michael responded. "I went from a 5,000 square foot penthouse to this. Nobody forced you to be with me. You can leave whenever you want." The words hung in the air like broken glass. They both knew immediately they had crossed a line. "I don't want to leave," Michael said softly. "I want this to work. But we need to find a way not to destroy each other while trying to rebuild ourselves." Emma collapsed on the couch, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the person I need to be while you're also broken." "Maybe it's not about having all the answers," Michael sat beside her. "Maybe it's about being honest about not having them." The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. They talked about their individual fears, their needs, their boundaries. They established rules for the shared space, individual time each day, specific nights where they did something together without discussing work or problems, an agreement that when one was in crisis, the other would try to be the rock. But theory was easier than practice. The last straw came when Michael was offered a job in Boston, a consulting position for a large firm that would pay well and help restore his reputation. The only problem, it required relocating for at least 6 months. "You could come with me," Michael suggested when he told her the news. "I just got established at the publishing house. I'm finally gaining traction. I can't just drop everything." "Then what do we do?" "I don't know." The conversation repeated for days, each time becoming more tense. Michael needed this opportunity to rebuild his career. Emma needed stability to rebuild her confidence. Both needs were valid, Both were incompatible. "Maybe this is a sign," Emma said one night, her voice small. "Maybe we're not meant to work out." "Don't say that." "Why not? Because it hurts. Things that hurt are sometimes true." Michael moved closer, framing her face with his hands. "What's true is that I love you. What's true is that together we're better than apart, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. But love isn't enough sometimes, is it? We also need timing, practical compatibility. And maybe our lives are going in different directions. Or maybe we're scared and looking for excuses not to keep fighting." The accusation rang true. Emma felt hot tears on her cheeks. "I'm so afraid of not being enough for you. That someday you'll wake up and realize you sacrificed too much. That you deserved better than a failed writer, 25 years younger. And I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you deserved someone without so much baggage. Someone successful. Someone who can give you security." They looked at each other, both vulnerable, both scared, both in love. "So what do we do?" Emma asked. "We decide, right now. Is this worth fighting for? Even if it hurts? Even if it's hard? Even if we don't know how it'll work?" Emma thought about all the times Michael had been there for her, how he held her when she doubted herself, how he played guitar now, allowing himself to be vulnerable, how he had transformed from a man of steel into someone capable of showing tenderness. She thought about Grandma Rose saying that true love was choice, not feeling, that it required work every day. "Yes," she said finally, "it's worth it. But we need help. We can't do this alone." "Therapy?" Emma nodded. "Therapy? Together. If we're going to do this, let's do it right." It was an admission that they didn't have all the answers, and paradoxically, that admission was the first real step toward finding them. Mature love is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of commitment to walk through it together. It's the willingness to seek help when you need it, to be vulnerable when it's hardest, to choose to stay when it would be easier to leave. The therapist's office, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was in the West Village, in an old building with a metal gate elevator that creaked as it ascended. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, a table with architecture and psychology magazines, and a diffuser emanating lavender scent. Michael and Emma sat side by side in the first session, both tense, both unsure what to expect. Dr. Vasquez was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in an elegant bob and eyes that seemed to see directly through the defenses people built. "Tell me why you're here," she said after initial introductions. Michael and Emma looked at each other, each waiting for the other to speak first. "We're struggling," Emma finally began. "We're both in difficult transitions and don't know how to support each other without losing ourselves. I ruined my company," Michael added with a tense voice, "and I fear I'm ruining this relationship too." Dr. Vasquez observed them attentively. "What does ruin mean to you?" The question unleashed an hour-long conversation where all the insecurities, fears, and destructive patterns they'd been hiding came out. Michael talked about his father, about how he learned that love was conditional based on success. Emma talked about her mother's death, about how she felt responsible for making her sacrifice worthwhile by being successful. "So you've both learned that you must earn love," the doctor summarized. Michael, earning it through financial success. Emma, earning it by being perfect. What would happen if neither of you had to earn anything? What if love simply was? It was a revolutionary idea for both. The weekly sessions became a sacred space. They learned to communicate without attacking, to express needs without blaming, to listen without defensiveness. It was hard work, harder than any professional challenge they'd faced. One particularly intense session revolved around the age difference. "There are almost 17 years between you," the doctor said. "That's not a small gap. How do you navigate the different life stages you're in?" "Sometimes I feel like I should let Emma experience life without being tied to someone so much older," Michael admitted. "That she should meet people her age, experience freedom." Emma turned to him sharply. "Why have you never told me this?" "Because I'm afraid that if I do, you'll realize I'm right and leave me." The raw honesty filled the room. "Michael," Emma took his hand, "I don't see you as old. I see you as you. And yes, we're in different life stages. But that doesn't mean we can't walk together. It just means we need to be intentional about how we do it." "And how do we do that?" Michael asked. Dr. Vasquez intervened. By respecting that Emma needs space to grow in her own identity, not just as Michael's partner, and recognizing that Michael needs to feel valued for who he is now, not who he used to be. They began implementing concrete changes. Emma enrolled in a creative writing workshop, independent of Michael. Michael accepted the job in Boston, but instead of asking Emma to follow, they agreed to a long-distance arrangement for 6 months, seeing each other on weekends. "It's like pressing pause but not stop," Emma explained to her grandmother in a phone call. "Sounds sensible," Rose responded. "Love doesn't always mean being physically together all the time. Sometimes it means giving space for each to grow." The first months of separation were harder than anticipated. Michael, alone in a small apartment in Beacon Hill, found himself facing his demons without Emma's constant presence to distract him. The nights were particularly hard, when dark thoughts about his worth and future invaded him. But there were also discoveries. Without Emma there to cook, he learned to prepare his own meals. Without her presence to fill the silence, he learned to be comfortable alone. And without being able to depend on her for emotional validation, he learned to find value in himself. In New York, Emma experienced her own transformation. With Michael absent during the week, the apartment felt empty, but also hers. She could spread manuscripts on the couch. She could write until 3 in the morning without worrying about disturbing someone. She could invite friends over and drink wine and laugh loudly without being conscious of interrupting someone else's work. One night, her friend Sophie came to visit. "You look different," Sophie observed. "More complete." "I feel different," Emma admitted. "Like I'm finally finding who I am outside of being Michael's girlfriend." "And is that a good thing?" Emma thought carefully before responding. "Yes, it's good for me, and I think it's good for us." We were so entangled that we'd forgotten where one ended and the other began. The writing workshop turned out to be exactly what Emma needed. The instructor, a novelist named Jack Martin, was brutally honest but constructive in his criticism. "Your writing has heart," he said after reading one of her stories, "but you're so worried about being perfect that you hold back. You need to write with your guts, not just your heart." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to be willing to be ugly, raw, imperfect on the page. Every writer's first instinct when facing pain is to beautify it, to resist it. But real writing comes when you dive into the pain, into the ugliness, and show it as it is." Emma started writing differently. Rawer, more honest stories, about the day her mother died, about the first night with Michael and how she felt lost and scared, about living in a penthouse feeling like an imposter, about loving someone who was broken and trying not to break too. The words flowed with an honesty she'd never achieved before, and though it was terrifying, it was also liberating. When she shared one of these new stories in the workshop, the silence that followed was different from the polite silence that usually followed readings. It was the silence of people deeply moved. "That," Jack said finally, "that is real writing." The weekends when Michael returned from Boston or Emma visited there were like mini honeymoons. They appreciated each other in new ways, seeing the growth occurring in each. "I like who you're becoming," Michael said one night as they walked along the Charles River in Boston. "And who am I becoming? Someone who doesn't need my approval to know their work is worthwhile. Someone who's finding their own voice." Emma smiled. "And I like who you're becoming. Someone who can be alone without feeling lonely. Someone who's playing guitar in bars and doesn't care if it's perfect." Michael had started playing at open mic nights at a small bar in the North End. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes he forgot chords or lost the rhythm. But there was a joy in the imperfection he'd never experienced when everything had to be controlled. "I think we're healing," Michael said. "I don't think healing is linear," Emma responded. "I think it's more like layers. Each layer we remove reveals another underneath, and that's okay. We don't need to be completely healed to be together." "What do we need then?" "We just need to be committed to keep removing layers, together but separate, separate but together." It was a paradox, but it was their truth. Sometimes love requires distance to flourish. Not the distance of hearts, but the distance that allows two people to breathe, grow, and return to each other, not out of need, but out of choice. Michael's 6-month contract in Boston was coming to an end, and with it came an important decision. He'd been offered a permanent position at the firm, with a significant salary and the title of consulting director. It was exactly the type of opportunity that 2 years ago he would have accepted without thinking twice. But now, sitting in his small Beacon Hill apartment looking at the printed offer, all he could think about was Emma writing on her laptop in New York, with bare feet on the couch and hair pulled back in a messy bun. He called her that night. "They offered me to stay," he said without preamble. There was a pause on the other end. Emma processing. "And what do you want to do?" "It depends." "On what?" "On you. On us. On what we're building." Emma took a deep breath. In the last 6 months, she'd learned that true love didn't mean sacrificing your dreams for another person, but she'd also learned that dreams could change, evolve, expand to include someone else. "I can't decide for you, Michael, but I can tell you what I need." "Tell me." "I need you to make this decision based on what you want, not on what you think I need. If you stay in Boston just for me, eventually you'll resent me. If you come back to New York just because you think we should be physically together, there'll be resentment too. So what do? Each of us decides what we want, and then we figure out how to make it work together." It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Michael spent the next week in deep introspection. What did he really want? Not what his father would have wanted, not what society expected of a man his age, not what would impress former colleagues. What did Michael Walker, the man, not the businessman, want? The answer came one night while he was playing guitar at the small bar. There was a group of college students at a nearby table, laughing and drinking cheap beer. They reminded him of Emma, of her youth, of her capacity to find joy in simple moments. And he realized he wanted a simple life. He wanted to play music. He wanted consulting occasionally, but not as a central identity. He wanted space to breathe. He wanted to be with Emma, but not in a way that suffocated her or drowned him. He rejected the offer in Boston. Instead, he proposed something radical to the firm: work as an independent consultant, taking specific projects as he wished, without being tied to an office or city. To his surprise, they accepted. Meanwhile, in New York, Emma faced her own revelation. The new manuscript she'd been writing, raw and honest in the way Jack had insisted, had caught the attention of an important literary agent. They wanted to represent her. They believed this new work had real potential, but there was a catch. They wanted significant changes. They wanted her to expand one particular story, the one about her relationship with Michael, turning it into a full novel. "I can't do that," Emma told her potential agent on a call. "That would be exposing our private life." "I'm not asking for non-fiction," the agent, a woman named Martha Silver, responded. "I'm asking for fiction inspired by your truth. There's a difference. Change names, details, settings, but keep the emotional essence. That's the gold." Emma told Michael about the offer when they saw each other the following weekend. "What do you think?" Michael looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen so much pain and so much growth. "I think you should do it. But it'll be about us. About everything, the age difference, the struggles, the fall of the empire. Doesn't it bother you that people will read about that?" "Want the honest answer?" "Always." "It terrifies me," Michael admitted. "The idea of strangers reading about my failures, my insecurities, everything I lost. But it also makes me proud, because it means you took our pain and transformed it into art. And if our story can help someone else who's struggling, then it's worth the discomfort." Emma hugged him tightly. "I love you for that." "Then do it. Write the story. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Give it a happy ending. Even though our ending is still being written, give readers hope. Let them know that imperfect love between two broken people can work." The following months were intense. Michael rejected the position in Boston and returned to New York, but with a completely different approach to his career. He took consulting projects selectively, only those that genuinely interested him. The rest of his time he devoted to music, taking advanced guitar classes, even beginning to write his own compositions. Emma wrote like she was possessed. The novel flowed from her with an ease she'd never experienced. It was liberating to fictionalize her life, to see her experiences through the prism of characters who were them but not them. She could give them different names, change details, but keep the central emotional truth. They lived together again, but differently. They'd learned to give each other space. Michael had his music studio in the small second bedroom. Emma had her writing corner by the window in the living room. They met for meals. They had intentional date nights. But they also had separate time, space to breathe. One evening, while eating homemade pasta that Michael had learned to make, Emma said something she'd been thinking about for months. "I think we were living backwards." "What do you mean?" "Most couples start by getting to know each other, falling in love, then facing challenges together. We jumped straight to the intense part, without really building a foundation first. We had to undo everything and rebuild from scratch." Michael considered this. "You're right. We went from 0 to 100 without passing through 50. But maybe that's what we needed. Maybe we needed the fire to burn away everything false before we could build something real." "And now, what do we have now?" Emma smiled. "Now we have a foundation. Not perfect, but real. Built on honesty, therapy, individual growth, and conscious choice." Michael raised his wine glass. "To imperfect foundations." Emma clinked with him. "To real foundations." They didn't yet know that in a few weeks Emma's novel would be accepted for publication with enthusiasm, that it would become a moderate success, not an international bestseller, but something that would resonate with thousands of readers, also navigating complicated relationships. They didn't know that Michael's music, recorded in a small Brooklyn studio as a passion project, would be discovered by a producer who'd see commercial potential in his unique blend of traditional folk with modern elements. They didn't know that together, in their imperfect way, they were about to demonstrate that success didn't have to look like what society dictated, that it could be quiet, personal, built on their own terms. All they knew in that moment, eating mediocre pasta in their small Brooklyn apartment, was that they had chosen each other, not out of desperation, not out of need, but because together, even in imperfection, they were more complete than apart. The true strength of a relationship isn't measured in the absence of problems, but in the presence of commitment to solve them. Not in never falling, but in getting up together each time. Not in being perfect, but in being authentic. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, while Emma was proofing galleys of her novel about to be published. The name on the phone screen made her freeze. Charleston Regional Hospital. "Miss Carter, this is Dr. Martinez from Charleston Regional. Your grandmother, Rose Carter, has suffered a stroke. She's stable now, but you need to come as soon as possible." Emma's world stopped. The woman who had raised her, who had taught her about love and resilience, who had been her rock after her mother's death, was in the hospital. The galley proofs fell to the floor, forgotten. Michael was in a meeting with a client when he received her frantic message. He didn't think twice. He cancelled the meeting, grabbed his guitar and some basic things, and within 30 minutes was at the apartment, ready to drive her to Charleston. The 10-hour drive was a blur of highways, anxiety, and tense silence. Emma stared out the window, hands clenched into fists on her lap. Michael drove with intense concentration, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her knee, a silent gesture of support. "What if I don't get there in time?" Emma whispered when they were an hour away. "You'll get there. And she'll be okay. Your grandmother is a strong woman. She's 83, Michael. Strokes at that age. Don't get ahead of yourself. Wait to know more." But they both knew they were avoiding the real conversation, that Rose was mortal, that someday Emma would have to face the loss of the last direct connection to her mother, that time was finite and precious. Charleston Regional was small compared to New York hospitals, but clean and efficient. They found Rose in a third-floor room, connected to monitors that beeped softly, with the left side of her face slightly drooped. But her eyes, when she saw Emma enter, lit up with life. "Child." Her voice was slurred, made difficult by the stroke, but it was her. "You didn't need to come running." Emma rushed to her side, taking her hand carefully. "Of course I needed to come. You're all I have." "No." Rose looked toward Michael, who remained respectfully near the door. "Not all." The following days were a whirlwind of medical consultations, treatment decisions, and nights spent in uncomfortable hospital chairs. Michael stayed, of course, but not just for Emma. He developed his own relationship with Rose, spending entire afternoons telling stories about Boston, playing guitar softly beside her bed when she couldn't sleep. One night, when Emma had fallen asleep in the chair, Rose gestured for Michael to come closer. "Come." "Closer?" Her speech was slowly improving with therapy, but was still labored. Michael approached. "You love her, don't you?" "With all my heart." "But do you let her fly?" Michael smiled. "I'm learning." She's a good teacher. Rose nodded slowly. My Emma is like her mother. Huge heart, but needs roots and wings. Roots to know where she belongs. Wings to explore who she can be. I'm giving her both. I know. That's why I'm at peace, knowing that when I'm not here, she'll have someone. You're going to be here for a long time yet. Rose looked out the window where the Carolina moon shone over Charleston's rooftops. Maybe, or maybe not. But if something happens, promise me you'll keep being her root. When she flies so high she forgets the ground, you remind her where home is. Michael felt tears stinging his eyes. I promise. Rose's recovery was slower than doctors had initially hoped. She wouldn't be able to live alone again, that was clear. She'd need constant care, probably a full-time assistant or a specialized facility. The conversation was inevitable and painful. I can't take you to New York with me, Emma said, tears flowing freely. The apartment is too small, not equipped for medical care, and you'd hate the city. I know, child, and I wouldn't go, even if you could. This is my home. Charleston, but I can't leave you in a nursing home with strangers. They won't be strangers, you mate, for long. I make friends, easily. It's my gift. Michael, who had been listening quietly, spoke. What if we find a middle ground? Both women looked at him. There are assisted living facilities here in Charleston, small specialized ones, not institutional nursing homes but adapted houses where 6 or 7 elderly people live with professional caregivers. I visited one this morning while you were at physical therapy. It's beautiful, Rose. It has a courtyard with a magnolia tree, flowers in the windows. The rooms have their own bathrooms and small porches overlooking the harbor. And how would we pay for that? Rose asked practically. It's already paid for the next 5 years. Emma turned sharply to Michael. You can't. It's already done. His voice was firm but gentle. And before you protest, it's not charity. It's family. Your grandmother welcomed me when I came here. She taught me things about what really matters. This is the least I can do. Rose looked at Michael with moist eyes. Your father taught you to use money as power, but you learned to use it as love. Well done, son. Well done. It was the first time anyone besides Emma had called him son with genuine affection. Michael had to leave the room for a moment to compose himself. Moving Rose into the assisted living facility took 2 weeks. It was a beautiful place, as Michael had described, a traditional Charleston home adapted with ramps, railings, and discreet medical equipment. The other residents were Charleston people Rose had known all her life. The primary caregiver, Patricia, was a middle-aged woman with easy laughter and gentle hands. On moving day, while Rose settled into her new room overlooking Charleston Harbor, Emma and Michael walked through the town where she'd grown up. Thank you for doing this, Emma said. Not just for the money, but for everything. For being here. For not making me choose between you and her. I would never ask you to choose. Love isn't zero-sum. We don't have to take from one person to give to another. They walked in silence for a moment, passing the bakery where Rose had bought bread for decades, the square where Emma had played as a child. I'm afraid, Emma admitted, that this is the beginning of the end for her. Strokes lead to more strokes, and eventually— I know, Michael stopped her, taking both her hands. And when that day comes, we'll face it together. But until then, she's here, alive, and happier here than in any New York hospital. Emma nodded, wiping her tears. She loves you, you know. I love her too. She's the family I chose, just like you. That night, they had dinner with Rose in the communal dining room of the facility. It was a cheerful space with checkered tablecloths and the sound of overlapping conversations. Patricia served she-crab soup, fried chicken, and collard greens, the flavors of the South. After dinner, Michael took out his guitar. He hadn't planned it, but he felt the need. He began playing a gentle blues, a melody full of melancholy joy. The other residents moved closer, some shuffling feet, others pushing walkers. Soon there was a circle of elderly people listening, some with eyes closed, others swaying gently to the rhythm. An elderly woman over 90 began to sing. Her voice was tremulous but clear, verses about love and loss she'd sung all her life. Others joined in. The dining room transformed into an impromptu jam session, full of life and memory. Emma watched, silent tears running down her cheeks. This was her heritage, not money or possessions, but this: music, community, human connection, the capacity to find joy even at the edge of the end. Michael looked at her while he played, and in that moment of shared understanding they both knew. They had walked through fire together. The age differences, the financial crises, the insecurities, the fears, all had been a forge. They hadn't been destroyed by the heat, they had been refined. True love reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in the trenches of crisis. When everything crumbles and the only option is to stay or leave, those who choose to stay discover that love isn't a feeling to be felt, but a choice to be made, day after day, moment after moment. 18 months after that transformative night, Michael and Emma stood in the community center they had opened together in Brooklyn. It wasn't a penthouse or a business empire or a success that business papers would cover. It was something more intimate and more permanent, a space where their passions and healed wounds converged. The building had been an old warehouse from the 19th century, with exposed brick walls and wooden beams darkened by time. It was called Rose House in honor of the woman who had taught them that true value resided in connection, not possession. On opening night, the courtyard was filled with people, not New York's elite in designer gowns, but neighborhood residents, emerging writers, street musicians, families with children. The aroma of Southern cooking and craft beer filled the air. Grandma Rose had made the trip from Charleston in a specially adapted van. She sat in a wheelchair decorated with flowers with Patricia by her side, watching everything with eyes bright with happy tears. Michael played guitar, an original composition called Tenderness. Emma read a passage from her novel published 6 months earlier. He had asked her to be gentle with his heart that first night, not realizing she would do something far more radical. She would teach him to be gentle with his own. When the crowd dispersed, Emma and Michael found a moment alone on the second-floor balcony. "Do you remember that first night?" Emma asked. "When I asked you to be gentle." "It changed my life completely," Michael responded. "It changed our lives, because it wasn't just about you being gentle with me. It was about us learning together what that word really means." Emma thought carefully before answering her own question. "It's allowing someone to see your cracks without trying to hide them. It's holding someone else's pain without trying to fix it immediately. It's choosing every day to treat each other's heart as the gift it is, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." 3 months later, a positive pregnancy test would change everything again. At 25, Emma discovered she was going to be a mother. The pregnancy was a journey of fears and wonders. When she had panic attacks, Michael guided her with breathing techniques learned in therapy. When he feared becoming like his father, she reminded him that monsters don't fear becoming monsters. The call came 2 weeks before delivery. Rose had suffered another stroke, more severe. In Charleston Regional Hospital, with her left side completely paralyzed, the elderly woman pronounced words that would be fulfilled as sacred promise. "I'll wait," to meet her. And against all medical odds, she did. When Emma went into labor, Rose was still clinging to life in Charleston. 20 hours later at dawn, a strong cry filled the delivery room. "It's a girl," the midwife announced. Michael cried without shame as he touched his daughter's little head. They named her Rose Emma Walker Carter, joining 4 generations in a single name. 2 days later, in the garden of the assisted living facility in Charleston, when Emma placed the baby in her grandmother's arms, the elderly Rose spoke words that came out clearer than they had in months. "Hello, little Rose. Welcome to the world." For 30 minutes, 4 generations were connected. The great-grandmother holding the great-granddaughter, Emma watching with tears, and the spirit of her mother present in every breath. Michael photographed the moment, knowing it was sacred. "Now, I can rest," Rose said with serenity afterward. 3 days later, she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by flowers, and with the photo of her great-granddaughter beside the bed. She had fulfilled exactly what she promised. At her funeral, Michael played guitar with a broken but authentic voice. Emma, holding the 2-week-old baby, reminded everyone that wealth is measured in lives touched with love, not in possessions accumulated. 2 years after that first transformative night, Michael and Emma were exactly where they needed to be. One Sunday afternoon, Emma found Michael on the apartment balcony, composing on his guitar. "What's it called?" "Home," he responded. playing a simple but warm melody, like an embrace in sound form. Little Rose woke from her nap with a happy cry. Together, they took her to the balcony where the herbs bloomed in shades of green and purple, the same plants Emma had insisted on planting years ago. "See the flowers, little one?" Emma pointed. "Your great-grandmother taught me to plant them. Someday I'll teach you." The baby extended her little hands toward the bright petals. "Gentle," Michael instructed softly, guiding her fingers. "Always gentle." And in that simple moment, Michael understood that he had spent 40 years building steel empires, when what he always needed was this: raw and real love, chosen and born family, the tenderness that comes from allowing yourself to be truly seen. Emma rested her head on his shoulder as he wrapped his arm around them, holding his small family in an embrace that was both refuge and liberation. "I love you," she whispered, "and I love you, both of you, more than words can express. Then show me, every day, in being gentle with my heart and with your own, until my last breath," Michael promised. And so, on a modest Brooklyn balcony, as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, 3 souls found what we all seek: belonging. They had cultivated beauty in the cracks of their wounds. They had grown flowers in the concrete of their defenses. They had created a garden of possibility where once there had been only desert. It wasn't a fairy tale love, it was something infinitely better. A real love, imperfect, laborious, frustrating at times, but also transformative, healing, brave, and profoundly true. The kind of love that doesn't promise perfection but presence, that doesn't guarantee ease but effort, that isn't a destination but a path walked together, step by step, with tenderness and courage intertwined. And they, with all their flaws and all their beauty, walked that path, forever imperfect, forever growing, forever tenderly loving.